The hills of Odd, West Virginia, have always carried a quiet story, a rhythm of life that moves slower than the rest of the world. In those hills sits a small home with peeling paint, a creaky porch, and a woman who has been holding on longer than most could. Betty Whittaker, sister, caretaker, survivor, now faces what might be her hardest chapter yet. It began with a letter, folded neatly in a plain envelope. It arrived one morning with no warning, no courtesy call, no gentle introduction, just a few sentences typed on official letterhead. Betty and Larry Whittaker have 30 days to resolve the septic system violation or vacate the property. 30 days. For most people, that might sound like an administrative issue, a property code violation, something to fix with a contractor or a few phone calls. But for Betty, it was something else entirely. It was a countdown, a threat to the only home she and Larry had left. When Brian, one of the few visitors who still came around to check on them, heard about it, he stopped by immediately. His truck rolled up the gravel drive, the camera sitting silent in the passenger seat. He found Betty sitting on the porch, the letter trembling in her hands. "They said I gotta fix it or leave," she murmured, "but I ain't got nowhere to go, Brian." Her voice carried that same mix of strength and sorrow it always had, a tone that had weathered too many storms. Brian took the letter, read it twice, and let out a slow sigh. "They gave you 30 days. She nodded. 30 days, like we can just make a new house in a month." Behind her, Larry sat quietly in a faded recliner near the door. His eyes followed the conversation, but his words stayed caught somewhere deep inside. Every now and then, he'd mutter, ain't right at all." Betty looked toward the hills, her gaze fixed on nothing in particular. "This is all we got," she whispered. The septic issue wasn't new. It had been hanging over them for months, years, even a shadow everyone saw, but few wanted to confront. The Whittaker home was built decades ago. Without the infrastructure, most modern properties have no proper plumbing, no standard waste system. For years, they managed with what they had, doing what rural families in hard places often do, making do. But now the state had stepped in. Environmental regulations, public health codes, inspections, words that rarely made sense in the slow language of mountain life, had suddenly arrived on their doorstep. Apparently, Brian explained later on his YouTube update, the state gave them 30 days to fix the septic system or vacate the property. 30 days, but here's the thing. That house is sitting on a granite slab. There's no easy way to dig a system in there. They'd have to bring in heavy equipment, maybe even blow through rock. We're talking thousands and thousands of dollars, and Betty, she doesn't even have $300 in her account right now. The viewers who had followed the Whittaker's story online flooded the comment section with shock and sympathy. Some offered prayers, others offered money, but even generosity has limits against state deadlines. In a place like Odd, neighbors still talk over fences. Word of the septic notice spread faster than wildfire. Some said it was inevitable, that the state was just doing its job. Others called it cruelty, plain and simple. "Why now?" one local woman asked. "Why, after everything that family's been through, you mean to tell me they couldn't find a better way than throwing them out?" Inside the small home, Betty was making coffee when Brian asked if she'd had any updates. "Not yet," she said, stirring sugar into a chipped mug. "They said they'll send someone back out in a week or two to check progress. I told them we don't have no money to do nothing yet, but they just nodded like they didn't hear me." Brian set down his camera, deciding against filming her tears this time. "We're going to figure something out," he said softly. But even as he said it, the words felt thin. In the days that followed, the internet began piecing the story together. A post on Patrick's fan club page mentioned the septic notice and added another detail: the property the house sits on isn't owned by Betty and Larry. That revelation sparked confusion and anger online. If Betty and Larry owned the home, but not the land, then who was responsible for the repairs? The property owner or the residents? The law wasn't clear, and neither was the morality. For Betty, It didn't matter who technically owned what. All she knew was that this was her home, her walls, her kitchen, her life. The idea of leaving it, even temporarily, felt like losing a piece of herself. One evening, Brian sat in his truck after another visit. The camera light glowed faintly as he spoke to his audience. "I'm going to be real with y'all," he said. "This is bad, real bad. Betty's trying. But how do you fight a clock when you don't have the tools? You can't fix something like that without money. And she doesn't have it. Nobody does. We're talking about digging through rock to install a tank, even if she raised the money tomorrow. Finding someone to do it out here that fast, it's next to impossible." He sighed, rubbing his forehead. "This ain't about septic tanks. It's about time. It's about what happens when the system forgets that poor folks can't move mountains in 30 days. The comments came flooding in again. "Can we start a fundraiser? Is anyone contacting the county? This makes me sick to my stomach." But as always, with every wave of compassion came skepticism, criticism, and fatigue. The internet was good at outrage, not so good at resolution. A week passed. Betty received another visit from a state worker this time, a man with a clipboard and a polite but distant smile. "Ms. Whittaker," he said, glancing around, "we're just here to check progress." She stood on the porch, her arms crossed. "Ain't no progress to check. Sir, I told y'all before, I don't got the means to fix it yet." He nodded. "We understand, but the 30-day window still stands." She frowned. "What happens if we can't fix it?" The man looked uncomfortable. "Then we'll have to begin relocation procedures." "Relocation," she repeated. "To where?" He didn't answer directly. "We'll cross that bridge when we get there." As he left, she called after him, her voice trembling but firm. "You ever lose everything before you ever have somebody tell you you got 30 days to stop being poor?" The man didn't turn around. That night, Brian stopped by again. The air outside was cool, the crickets loud. He found Betty sitting on the porch steps, a cigarette burning between her fingers. "You okay?" he asked quietly. She gave a small laugh. "You ever get tired of being strong, Brian?" He didn't answer. She looked out over the dark hills. "I've been fighting my whole life, first for my family. Now, for this house. I don't even know what I'm fighting anymore." "You're fighting for what's yours," he said. She nodded. "Yep, but sometimes it feels like the world don't think people like us deserve to have anything." The next morning, the postman dropped off another envelope. Inside was an estimate from a local contractor, $7,850 to install a compliant septic system. Betty placed the paper on the table and stared at it. "Might as well be $7 million, she muttered. When Brian came by later, she handed it to him. "What am I supposed to do with this?" He didn't have an answer. He looked around at the familiar room. The worn couch, the photos on the wall, the faint hum of the old refrigerator. This was a home built not with money, but with years of small efforts and stubbornness. To lose it over something buried in the ground felt cruel beyond reason. As the days passed, Brian shared updates online. The internet buzzed with talk of fundraisers, petitions, and calls to local officials. Some people reached out privately offering help. Others criticized the state for acting heartlessly. But through it all, Betty remained steady. Tired, yes, but resolute. "They ain't gonna run me off that easy," she said one afternoon. "They can take the dirt, but they can't take what this place means to me." Brian smiled. "You still got fight in you." "Always will," she replied. Meanwhile, whispers began circulating that Eric, the man who once handled the family's online accounts of donations, had gone silent. No posts, no comments, no updates. Some claimed he still had money from the old fundraising days, while others said it was frozen or gone. "Whatever the truth is," Brian said in a later video, "it ain't helping Betty right now, and that's what matters." As he closed his laptop that night, the comment section continued to grow. Thousands of people across the country, strangers bound together by empathy for a woman fighting a bureaucratic deadline. 30 days, and the clock was still ticking. The days following the notice felt like sand slipping through Betty's fingers. Fast, unstoppable, unforgiving each morning. She woke with the same dread sitting heavy in her chest, counting the days she had left in the only home she'd ever really known. 26 days now, she said softly one morning. Glancing at the calendar tacked beside her refrigerator, the numbers were written in shaky blue ink, a small X crossing out each day as it passed. Feels like they're going faster now that I'm watching. The coffee pot gurgled in the background. Larry sat in his chair by the door, half awake. Watching her move around the kitchen, the air between them was quiet, the kind of silence that comes when words don't fix anything. I ain't slept right since that paper came, Betty said. I keep thinking if I close my eyes, the next time I wake up, it'll all be gone. Larry just nodded. We'll figure something. He mumbled, always do. But even he didn't sound sure. Brian returned a few days later, camera in hand, his face lined with worry. He had been filming updates for weeks. Not for the views, but to document what was happening to a family he'd come to love. When he stepped out of the truck, Betty met him at the porch with the faintest smile. You came back, she said. Of course I did, he replied. I'm not going anywhere till we get this figured out. He set the camera on the porch rail, but didn't turn it on yet. Any word from the county? She shook her head. Nothing, just that same letter sitting on the table every time I walk past it. It feels like it's Logan at me. Brian sighed, pulling out a folded paper from his pocket. I made some calls, he said. Talked to a few contractors about the septic situation. Cheapest quote I could find was around $7,000. And that's just the start. They'd have to bring in special equipment cause of that granite underneath the house. Betty looked at him blankly. $7,000. He nodded, and they want half up front. She laughed, though it came out more like a cough. I don't even got half of 100. Later that evening, Brian uploaded another video. Betty has 26 days left. The thumbnail was simple: the Whittaker home, evening lights spilling across the front steps. In the video, Brian's voice was tired. This ain't clickbait. He said it's real. Betty and Larry have less than a month before they're forced off the property. The septic issue's been ignored for years. But now the state's serious. If it's not fixed, they'll lose their home. He paused, eyes soft. They don't have the money. They don't have anywhere else to go. We're trying to find solutions. Maybe a fundraiser. Maybe some help from the county. But time's running out. By the next morning, the comments were overflowing. I can't believe they'd do this to her. How can I help? This system is broken, absolutely heartless. A small group of fans organized a Facebook thread dedicated to solutions. Contractors, donations, legal help. One woman claimed to have reached out to a local lawyer willing to offer advice pro bono. Another posted the contact information for a rural assistance program that helped low-income homeowners with sanitation upgrades. But while strangers online scrambled for answers, Betty was still in her kitchen. Phone pressed to her ear, trying to reach a county number that never picked up. Always a machine, she muttered after hanging up. They don't want to talk to people like me. They just send letters. By day 15, the anxiety in the house had settled like dust. Always there, covering everything. Larry grew quieter. Betty stopped cooking full meals. She spent more time on the porch, chain-smoking cigarettes, and watching the same car pass the house at the same time each afternoon. I've been thinking, she told Brian one day, maybe it's time I go stay with Patrick for a while. I don't want to be a burden. Brian frowned. You're not a burden, you're the one being wronged. But I can't keep fighting people with money and power, she said. They don't listen when you're poor. They just wait you out till you give up. He looked at her, sadness clouding his eyes. You're stronger than you think. She smiled faintly. Strength don't pay no bills. The story began picking up traction again. Online local media outlets started asking questions. Why is the state threatening eviction for a disabled couple in rural West Virginia? One headline read. When reporters reached out to the county office for comment, the response was short. Environmental health standards must be upheld for the safety of residents and the community. That line, for the safety of residents, infuriated Betty when she heard it. Safety, she snapped. How safe they think I'm going to be when I'm living in the car. Brian caught the moment on camera, but never uploaded it. It was too raw, too painful. Meanwhile, Eric's name started popping up again in comment sections. Rumors swirled that he still had access to funds from the family's previous social media pages. Some accused him of hoarding the money. Others said it was frozen due to investigations. Brian tried to stay neutral in his videos. I don't know what Eric's situation is, he said, but what I do know is that Betty and Larry need help right now, and the past ain't helping their present. Behind the scenes, he tried calling Eric himself. Several times, each call went to a screened voicemail system. When Brian finally got through, it cut off before he could leave a full message. He sent a text, no response. Day 21 came, and with it, another visit from the inspector. Betty stood at the porch again, arms crossed, jaw tight. Ms. Whittaker, he said, flipping through his clipboard, we're here for a follow-up. She sighed. Ain't nothing changed, sir, I told you all that. The man looked uncomfortable but firm. We understand, but we have to document the lack of progress. It's part of the procedure. Procedure, she muttered. That's all it ever is with y'all, paperwork and rules, while folks like me get pushed out of their homes. He hesitated before answering. If you can show proof of an attempt to fix the issue, a contract, a deposit, something, it might buy you more time. Betty blinked. Buy me time? You think I got money to buy time? That night, she sat by the window long after Larry went to bed outside. The hills were dark, and still she held the notice in her lap, running her fingers over the crinkled paper. I've been through worse, she whispered, but I don't know how much more worse I can take. Brian came by the next morning and found her asleep at the table. Her head resting on her arms, the letter was still there, open beside an untouched cup of cold coffee. He didn't wake her, he just looked around the quiet room and felt the weight of it all. When he finally spoke to the camera later, his voice broke. This ain't right, he said. No one deserves to live like they're on a countdown. Betty's a good woman. She's done everything she can, but she's being buried under rules and fines that don't make sense for people who don't have the means. They're treating her like a problem instead of person. By day 24, word spread that a small fundraiser had been started. Organized by viewers moved by Betty's story, donations trickled in slowly. A few dollars at a time, messages of hope filled the page. You're not alone, Betty. We love you from Kentucky. Keep fighting, we're praying for you. When Brian told her about it, she smiled for the first time in days. Strangers help in me, she said softly. Ain't that something the world's mean, but it ain't all bad. Still, reality lingered. 30 days was 30 days. Hope didn't stop a bulldozer or erase a law. Day 27. The phone rang that morning. Betty picked it up, bracing herself for more bad news, but instead, it was someone from the local news station asking to interview her. She hesitated. What for? We want to hear your side. The woman said, people are talking, and we think your story needs to be heard. For a moment, Betty thought about saying no, but then she looked around her small kitchen, at the peeling wallpaper, the old photos taped to the wall, the chipped counter where she'd cooked meals for decades. Fine, she said, you come see for yourself. That night, Brian called. You sure you want to go public like that? She said, let him see what it looks like when the state gives somebody 30 days to lose their home. Brian nodded. Then let's tell it right. And with that, they began to prepare. Not for eviction, but for exposure. For once, Betty's story wouldn't be whispered about in fan pages or buried in comment sections. It would be told out loud. As the camera light flickered to life, Betty straightened her blouse, took a deep breath, and said quietly to herself, they think 30 days is enough to take what I built, but they don't know me yet. The countdown wasn't over, but neither was she. By the time the third week came and went, West Virginia felt heavier. The air hung thicker around Betty's house, as if the hills themselves knew something was about to change. The days were quieter, too. No sound but the low hum of crickets, the creak of the porch swing, and the occasional rustle of wind against the tin roof. Betty sat at her kitchen table, staring at the calendar again. 29 days gone, only one square left untouched. One day between her and whatever came next. The letter still sat in plain sight, tacked crookedly to the refrigerator door. She'd read it so many times she could recite every word. The paper had gone soft from her fingers, the ink smudged near the date where her hand always lingered. Larry sat by the window, half listening to the radio. His eyes followed a small bird hopping along the porch rail outside. "Ain't been no peace in this house since that paper came," he muttered. Betty sighed. "Ain't been no peace in this whole town since that camera came." When the local reporter arrived, the driveway filled with noise again, the crunch of tires on gravel, the metallic slam of car doors, the soft hum of a camera booting up. It was the first time someone from outside their little circle had come to see what was really happening here. "Ms. Whittaker, thank you for speaking with us," the reporter said, her tone polite but distant. Betty squinted in the sunlight, shading her eyes. "Ain't got much choice, do I?" The reporter smiled nervously. "We just want to understand your situation. We've heard that the state has given you a 30-day deadline regarding a septic issue." "That's what they said." Betty nodded slowly. "Said if we can't fix it, we gotta go, but nobody telling us where we supposed to go." The camera zoomed in slightly. "And have you been able to get any help from the county or state?" Betty gave a dry laugh. "Help no, ma'am, just rules, and letters ain't no help in a letter." Larry looked on silently as Betty continued. Her voice cracked only once when she said, "They talk about public safety, but what's safe about throwing folks out into the cold?" When the interview aired that night, the clip spread fast. The internet lit up again. Facebook groups, YouTube comments, even a few local news stations re-uploaded it. "I can't believe this is happening in 2025. This woman deserves better. Where's all the donation money that was supposed to help them?" The story became more than just a local controversy. It became a symbol, a fight between poverty and policy, between compassion and cold procedure. Brian came by the next day, tired but smiling faintly. "You went viral, Betty," he said, holding up his phone. "You're all over Facebook and TikTok." She rolled her eyes. "Viral don't pay no bills." He laughed. "True, but people are paying attention now. That's something." He sat down at the table and unfolded his laptop. "The fundraiser's up to 4,000 now." Betty blinked. "4? Yeah, the donations are still coming in. Strangers from all over Texas, Oregon, even someone from Canada sent money." For the first time in days, her face softened. "Why would people care about me all the way over there?" Brian smiled. "'Cause your story matters, Betty. People see you fighting, and it reminds them what humanity looks like." She leaned back in her chair, the weight of exhaustion showing in her eyes. "Well, I'm tired of fighting. I just want to live in peace. I ain't both there and nobody." The next morning, Brian filmed a quiet update. He walked around the house, pointing to the cracks in the walls, the patched-up pipes, the old sink that still ran brown for a few seconds when turned on. "This is what the state's calling unlivable," he said, "but you ask anyone from around here and they'll tell you. This place is a home, a hard one, but a home nonetheless." He turned the camera toward Betty, sitting on the porch. "You want to say anything to the people watching?" She looked up. "Thank y'all," she said softly, "for helping, for caring. I don't got the fancy words, but I got the heart for it. I'm grateful." The video racked up hundreds of thousands of views overnight. Donations crossed $6,000 by morning. For the first time, there was a spark of hope. But bureaucracy moves slower than compassion. When Brian called the local contractor again, he explained the situation. "Even with the money, we can't start right away." The man said, "We need permits, and those can take weeks. The rock foundation complicates everything." Brian's stomach dropped. "Weeks? She doesn't have weeks. She's got days." "I know," the contractor said softly, but there's nothing I can do without permission from the county." When he hung up, Brian sat in his truck, gripping the steering wheel in frustration. He turned on the camera briefly. "Here's the problem," he said. "We've got people donating, people who care we've got enough to start, maybe even finish the project, but the red tape is killing us. The system that's supposed to help poor folks is the same one suffocating them." He paused, looking off into the woods, and Betty's the one paying the price. By day 28, the mood in the house shifted again. Larry was pacing the living room. Muttering under his breath, Betty sat by the window, chain smoking her nerves away. "I called that lady at the office again," she said to Brian when he stopped by. "Told her we got the money. She said they still got to do an inspection before they approve the work." Brian frowned. "When's that happening?" She said, "Sometime next week." He blinked. "Next week? You ain't got next week, Betty." "I know," she said, her voice breaking. "But what you want me to do, Brian? I can't make a move faster." That night, rain began to fall, heavy, steady, relentless. It drummed on the tin roof like a warning. The smell of wet earth filled the air, and water pooled along the dirt driveway. Brian filmed the rain hitting the porch steps. "This is what she's up against," he said quietly. "They're telling her to dig into this land, solid granite, in the middle of a storm, and fix a system that's older than most of us. 30 days to solve a problem 30 years in the making." He turned the camera toward the house, the faint yellow glow of the porch light flickering, and she's doing it with nothing but heart. When the rain stopped the next morning, Betty went outside to check the damage. The ground was soaked, the yard muddy, and uneven. A section near the back had caved slightly from erosion. She looked at it for a long time before shaking her head. "God's doing the digging for me now," she said bitterly. Brian chuckled softly, though the humor didn't reach his eyes. "Let's hope he sends an inspector too." By now, the community had started organizing. A local church offered volunteers to help clean the property and dig trenches if needed. A small hardware store owner promised supplies at cost. The county silence was starting to look cruel in the face of so much goodwill. "People are showing up, Betty," Brian said one afternoon. "You're making believers out of folks." She smiled faintly. "I never asked to be nobody's cause." "I know," he said gently, "but sometimes people need someone to fight for, and you're worth fighting for." That evening, Betty received a call from a woman. She didn't know. Her voice trembled with excitement. "Ms. Whittaker, my name's Paula. I work with a nonprofit in Charleston. We saw your story. We help folks with emergency home repairs. If you can get us a quote and proof of ownership, we might be able to step in." Betty's hand shook. "You mean help for real?" "Yes, ma'am, real help." After hanging up, she sat in stunned silence. When Brian arrived later, she handed him the phone. "They said they might help," she whispered. "Like real help, Brian." He grinned wide. "Then let's get to work." For the first time in weeks, there was energy in the house. Papers spread across the table, calls made back and forth, signatures scribbled on forms. Larry even cracked a smile. "Maybe we're going to make it after all," he said softly. But time, as always, was merciless. The clock didn't stop just because hope returned. The deadline still loomed. 2 days left. The application was submitted. The funds were being reviewed, but no promises were made. Betty knew better than to celebrate too early. That night, she sat alone on the porch, staring out into the dark hills. The air was cool, carrying the scent of pine and rain. She whispered to herself, almost in prayer, "Lord, I ain't a skin for much. Just let me keep my home." Inside, the refrigerator hummed softly, the calendar still marked with that final square. Brian filmed one last update for the night. "We've got movement," he said. "We got people stepping up, but there's still a chance, no, a fear, that it won't be fast enough. Bureaucracy doesn't run on human time, but Betty's running out of days." He looked into the lens, his eyes tired. "If you're watching this, keep her in your prayers. Keep talking, keep caring, because silence is what kills people like Betty." The final day dawned gray and heavy. 30 days. Betty woke early, her hands trembling as she poured her coffee. She didn't say a word. Larry sat beside her, equally quiet. When Brian arrived, she met him at the door. "You ever had a dream you don't want to wake up from?" she asked. He nodded. "Well," she said softly, "this house is mine. Even if they take it, it'll still be mine." Morning came with a cold stillness that didn't belong to spring. The mist hung low over the hills, and the Whittaker house sat silent beneath it. Old wood and tin holding its breath, the air felt heavy with something final. Inside, Betty stood by the window, coffee mug in hand. Her eyes were red. Though she hadn't cried in front of Larry, "Today's the day," she whispered. 30 days. Larry sat in his usual chair, his hat pulled low, his voice rough. "Ain't right," he said. "Ain't ever been right." On the kitchen table sat a stack of papers. The official notice, the contractor's quote, the half-filled forms for the nonprofit that had promised to help. Promised, but not in time. Bureaucracy had its own clock, and it never stopped for anyone. At 8 a.m., Brian's truck pulled into the gravel driveway. He stepped out slowly, his camera hanging limp at his side. For once, he didn't know if he wanted to film. "You holding up?" he asked softly. Betty gave a small shrug. "Just waiting," she said. "They said they'd come by before noon." "Who?" "The county fella, the one with the clipboard." They sat on the porch together, the morning creeping by in silence. Every few minutes, Betty would glance down the road. "Feels like waiting on a storm you can't stop," she murmured. Around 10:30, a white county truck appeared, kicking dust into the air as it rolled up the hill. Larry stood and went inside without a word. He couldn't watch. The man who stepped out was the same inspector who'd come before. Polite, soft-spoken, but rigid in his duty, clipboard in hand, badge on his chest. He nodded at Betty. "Morning. Ma'am, I'm here for the final check." She folded her arms. "Ain't much to check. You can see with your own eyes. Nothing's changed." He hesitated. "I understand your frustration, believe me. I do, but my job's to follow the order." Betty's voice sharpened. "And my job's to live here. Been doing that just fine till y'all showed up." The man lowered his gaze. "I'm sorry. Miss Whittaker, I wish there was more I could do." "Sorry don't fix nothing," she said. "Sorry don't give me no ground to stand on." Brian stood off to the side, silent, filming the exchange. He zoomed in on Betty's face. Not for drama, but because the world needed to see what it looked like when a person stood up for something they were about to lose. The inspector handed her another paper. "This is the official notice of relocation," he said. "You'll need to vacate within 72 hours. Betty took it, but didn't look down. "And where are you supposed to go?" "There are temporary housing options." She cut him off. "Don't insult me. You ever slept in temporary housing? Smells like bleach and hopelessness." He said nothing. "Tell your bosses," she continued, her voice trembling but strong, "that this ain't justice. This is cruelty dressed up as paperwork." After the truck pulled away, Betty went inside and set the new paper beside the old one. The two notices lay side by side, 30 days apart, both signed by someone who had never set foot in her kitchen until now. Larry came out from the back room. "They gone?" "They're gone." He nodded. "Then we stay in." Betty smiled faintly. "You know they'll come back." He looked around at the walls, the old clock, the framed photos of their parents. "Let him. This house knows us better than they do." That evening, as the sun sank behind the hills, Brian sat with them on the porch, the camera rested quietly between his feet. No interviews, no updates, just silence. 3 people watching the sky turn orange and gold. "I'm sorry, Betty," Brian finally said. She shook her head. "You ain't the one. Took nothing from me. You tried to help. That's more than most." He looked at her hands, rough and tired from years of work. "What are you going to do now?" She thought for a long moment before answering. "Same thing I always done. Wake up, make coffee, keep breathing. Ain't no paper going to tell me how to live." When Brian uploaded the final video that night, he didn't add music or commentary, just quiet moments. The sound of birds, the creak of the porch, Betty's voice saying, "They can take the dirt, but they can't take my home." The video went viral within hours. Thousands of comments poured in. She deserves justice. Someone please help her. This broke my heart. A few viewers even reached out with offers. Lawyers, advocates, even a retired contractor willing to help for free. But for now, all anyone could do was wait. The system had spoken. The next morning, Betty woke early. The mist had lifted, and the light poured through her window. She walked out onto the porch, barefoot, coffee steaming in her hand. Brian's last video had already reached 500,000 views. Overnight donations were still coming in. Messages of love from strangers filled her phone. She looked at the hills and whispered, "Guess the world finally sees us." Larry came out behind her. "You think they'll really come back for us?" She took a deep breath. "Maybe, but I ain't leaving till they make me." And with that, she sat down on her porch, her place, her ground, her home, as the clock kept ticking and the rest of the world kept watching. Thank you for watching this video. Click here to watch another video that might interest you.